We have to record this for all posterity.
Sounds good.
Dalton, would you lead us in prayer?
I'd be glad to. Lord, we want to thank you for this moment that you've set aside for us to fellowship with you and with one another for the purpose of moving our brother Zach forward in that which you've called him to do. We thank you, Lord, for everyone that you've allowed to be here on this call. We thank you for this piece of technology that we trust you will work perfectly even as we go into this. We pray for Zach and for every participant here, Lord, for your inspiration. And we ask, Lord, that you make us true value added to Zach's life for your glory and human flourishing. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Let me just do one thing here a second. I've not done this before, but I think I'm going to do it now. Hold on a second. Share my screen. Seems important to me that we kind of look at the top part of this little form that three of us will fill out toward the end of this time. But it kind of gives the goals of an oral review. And you guys all see on that screen?
Yes.
Yep.
I think it's good just to kind of go over those. You know, the goals of this oral review, number one, to provide the student with the opportunity to make a presentation that summarizes the highlights of the final project, and Zach will do this in a few minutes. Number two, to provide a final consultation where the student can interact with practitioners, research experts, and his or her personal learning community. And finally, to celebrate the student's graduation. And I think we're trying to ensure that our oral reviews are not a downtime, okay? All the critical reviews should have been done before we reach this stage, I think, in the process. And so we want it to be a time of celebration, a time of hearing what the Lord would be saying to each one of us and learning what each of us need to be learning to move on from here. And so I think it's just good to keep those goals in mind. That we're not here to be a critical review board, but we're here to listen to the Lord and celebrate what the Lord is doing through this work that Zach has been doing at BGU. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to you here, Zach. We're going to spend some time going through the presentation that Jack has prepared. Then we'll spend a little time doing some discussion, be thinking of thoughts, issues you'd like to talk about during the discussion time. After we've finished that, the three of us on the voting committee, Brian, myself, and Dot, will go into an evaluation time. Hopefully that shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. I have to take everyone out of the session except the three of us for about 10 minutes. Then I'll bring everybody back in and we'll celebrate. All right?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Zach, go for it. Go ahead and lead us through this time.
I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Is that the presentation? Showing up on yours? Showing up on your screens?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Looking good.
All right, so the title of my dissertation, first of all, let me just say thank you to Aaliyah, my wife, and then also my parents, Jim and Lisa. You guys are on here, I think. Pretty sure I saw your smiling faces. This is my personal learning community, these three. I've moved so many times since I started my process with BGU that it just made sense to have my family members be my personal learning community. I'm also in business with my dad, so we communicate regularly. He's a mentor to me. And then Aaliyah and my mom, Lisa, both are major support in my life as well. So thank you all for being on here too. And this will be the first time you hear some of these things in this context other than, just strictly reading my dissertation and kind of talking with me about several of these things over several months and years, really. All right, the title of my dissertation was Intervention and Intentional Transitions of human systems in chaos. And so this is the oral review for my program. Here's just a quick outline or agenda for what, just reiterating what Dr. Payne already said. I'm going to spend about a minute on several of these things. And then once we get down to sources and scope of project, I'll spend 2 minutes on each of those items, and then 45 minutes we've got allotted if we need to take that much time for just general discussions, Q&A around the presentation and project. Sound good? I'll take that as a yes. All right, so let's talk about the specific problem addressed. And I've written some notes for myself just so that I kind of stay on point here. In 2015, the World Economic Forum determined that lack of leadership is a top 3 global issue on the planet. And in my opinion, this lack of leadership, and based on my research and subsequent lack of faith in leaders, is a cause for escalating natural and man-made chaos. And what I mean by chaos in this presentation is the absence of human flourishing. When there is the absence of human flourishing, then there are several success factors that are not being met for humanity or human beings in a particular context, which are order, simplicity, health, and purpose. And so that's what I mean when I say chaos. Chaos is systemic and it must be addressed on many fronts. Complexity is sort of a manifestation of chaos. It overwhelms people. Confusion is within people. Conflict is chaos that is between people, and crises actually happen to people. These are all manifestations of chaos. So chaos results in multiplying complexities, mass and personal confusion, crises of belief, and it also perpetuates ongoing global and local conflicts. So the specific problem that I sought to address with this project is framing it in a question: how do transformational leaders, or how do leaders become transformational leaders that turn chaos or complexity into simplicity, confusion into clarity, conflict into peace, and have a capacity and competency to bring order out of chaos? So that's the problem that I sought to address through this project. And so the context and background of the project is this same lack of leadership that I've already mentioned, referred to, is a global phenomenon. It's experienced at every level and in every sector. And so I looked at specifically business, government, NGOs, and mass media. Did not do a deep dive into any one of those particularly, but looked at all 4 of these quadrants together to form the context and background of this project. And these quadrants, I showed how current issues are connected to this lack of leadership that I keep referencing, and the lack of faith in leaders that is a effect or a damage that flows from this lack of leadership cause. So many established leaders in business, government, NGOs, mass media around the world are failing to put chaos in check, both at the personal level and collectively for those that they lead. And this lack of leadership, again, is a global phenomenon. All right, moving on. The target audience or ideal audience for this project and future iterations of this project, because I have intentions to do various things with repurposing and recycling this content in the future, is established and emerging leaders who are seeking to change themselves for good and to transform human systems that are in chaos, moving them toward human flourishing. So these leaders that I'm referring to are likely people of faith who are working in business, government, NGOs, and mass media, these 4 quadrants, with varying levels of responsibility and influence, and they're probably in global cities. So my personal role in addressing the problem, first of all, I'm a macro thinker, and you guys all probably know that about me by now. And so from a young age, part of my personal story, my parents know this very well, Leah knows this, I've sort of lived with this internal motivation that I feel like I have to pursue things and create things that have the potential, whether or not they do is another issue, but that have the potential to impact lots of people. And so I have been and I continue to develop a reputation for being a bridge builder, and that's articulated in my dissertation. And what I mean by that, just plainly, is connecting silos of marketplace and ministry in context. And so I'm comfortable having one foot in the world and one foot in the church, and that allows me to be in two places at once. And because of that, I've developed a unique set of skills and perspective. And hopefully you guys have noticed that about me throughout my time with BGU in our interactions. So while this project is a contribution, I believe, to both global and Shalom leadership that BGU focuses on, I believe that I viewed the current state of business, government, NGOs, and mass media through a prophetic lens. And I think, the contribution to global leadership, meaning that I've included several global perspectives, and I'll talk more about that here in a few moments on some other slides. And then Shalom, I've emphasized what I think are several peacemaking strategies that can be implemented relationally by people who have a platform for influence, or in any platform for influence that any person would have. And this, idea of looking at things or articulating a prophetic lens, I think what I've done is my ability to intuit frustrations of marginalized people, just sort of the compassionate mercy gift mix that I have, being able to feel what other people feel, being able to intuit what other people are experiencing and putting that into words. I've been able to do that, I believe, through this dissertation. And oftentimes people who they see no other options but to go along with the program. And so I feel like I'm offering some alternatives. Let's move on to intervention strategy of the project. The way that I structured this here on the slide is the plan, process, evaluation. So I created an assessment instrument. I sought to create content that I could repurpose into a how-to guide or a book, essentially, possibly in the future. I also created a website where this content will live, and I can show you that here in a few moments. And then the process was I used a literature review, comprehensive literature review. I conducted several site visits, interviews, and questionnaires along the way, all connected to this project over a several-year period of time. And then as far as the results that provided the content for my assessment instrument, I weighed those against my sample against the DISC behavioral assessment. And that's a trusted personal and professional development tool that I'm sure you all are familiar with. So just to reiterate, I prepared a comprehensive literature review. I interviewed a diverse and select group of established and emerging transformational leaders around the world who are intervening in important and unusual situations. I identified the usual behaviors of transformational leaders based on who I was interviewing and interacting with, who interject themselves into human systems of chaos. And then I simplified and matched these behaviors to the DISC profile. And last, I created a short assessment, a proprietary assessment instrument to help established and emerging transformational leaders discover their intervention archetype. So these 4 intervention archetypes, they are pathways for turning complexity into simplicity, confusion into clarity, resolving conflicts, and bringing order out of chaos. So they are pathways for moving people from where they are to where they need to be, which is flourishment. So the 4 intervention archetypes are pathways for transformational leaders to make the greatest impact in their families, communities, organizations, and the world by influencing the way the world thinks and acts, making important decisions and getting results, designing and building awesome things, and mentoring others to their highest potential. So these 4 intervention archetypes that I discovered are what I would call being a culture creator, a decision maker, an organizational architect, and a talent scout. These are the 4 ways or terms that I use to refer to the 4 different archetypes. So the website I created is called interventionarchetype.com. And I also prepared a book proposal in anticipation of BGU or some other entity potentially helping me take the work to the next level. I'm going to show you quickly the Intervention Archetype website. This would be the front page when you get to the website. It says 5 minutes to discover how you are meant to turn complexity into simplicity, confusion into clarity, conflict into peace, and bring order out of chaos. So you can click and take the assessment, and that walks you through that process. So this lives on Google Drive right now, or you can go to the journal, and I'll be posting more content, basically repurposing content for my dissertation on the journal side. Okay, now I got to get back to, there we go. All right, so let's move on. Sources and scope of project. Again, I want to thank my personal learning community. Many or all of you have provided a lot of feedback and input on this project. And then also my friend Joshua Lemus, who lives in Houston, Texas area, provided a lot of feedback and input on chapters 1 and 2. And Josh is someone that I collaborate with on creative projects, and he had a lot of value as well. So other sources, and then focusing on the scope, I conducted research on 3 different continents: Nigeria, Middle East, US, were places that I actually conducted site visits, conducted interviews, and distributed questionnaires. So I've got Dr. Raju on here, and also Dr. McCabe. Thank you guys for introducing me to people, hosting me, showing me around. You know, every way that you contributed on this project, I appreciate you all very much. Reading and giving feedback and input, and just also, you know, being mentors and coaches to me as well throughout this process. I appreciate you guys. I want to focus on the interviews I conducted with in Nigeria, and then also after my trip in country there. One of the interviews that I thought was especially helpful was with a man named Michael, who leads an organization, is the founder of an organization called Tech Vibes. Dr. Raju knows who I'm talking about, and is a wonderful example of a transformational leader who is addressing chaos in his context. You know, his input through the interviews was extremely helpful for me. And I think I conducted 8 in-country interviews in either an individual or group setting while I was in Nigeria, and then had 2 interviews that happened over a period of time with Dr. Raju, and then also Michael as well with Tech Vibes. And then in the Middle East, one of the things that was special about my site visits in the Middle East is that I was able to get a better visualization of the geography of the Holy Land. I'd always read about, you know, all these different sites in the Bible, was able to see how they're all connected together. My understanding or perspective on what I mean when I refer to the Holy Land was significantly expanded to not just include the land of Palestine and Israel, but also the entire Middle East. And then I was able to better understand and be aware of and sympathetic toward the ongoing issues that are happening for people in the Holy Land, based on the brutal legacies of like repeated wars, occupations, and the oppression, systematic oppression of people of the land. And so that certainly made it into my dissertation project. And also I'm about to, I was just, you know, talking earlier about sharing an article that I wrote with Dr. Baki, who I traveled with there, potentially maybe his last time to travel there to the Middle East, and it was a special experience. And then also Rami Felaman, who I was able to meet. He was my guide there in Israel and Palestine, and have developed a friendship with him, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. And then in the U.S., I delivered a dozen questionnaires to emerging leaders that are connected to CCDA, the organization, Christian Community Development Association, and also a few established leaders who are practicing CCD principles in their context, everyone working in global cities that are part of the U.S. And so just including all of the input and feedback into this project from all of these individuals really helped to shape this project so it has more of a global perspective that's multicultural and multi-generational. And also, I'll just say, I think I had over 140 literary sources or internet sources as well that were made up this project. Okay, transformational changes of the project. So for me personally, I was able to see my personal and professional network expanded through this project. Just the fact that I was working on this project got me a foot in the door with decision makers at the Christian Community Development Association, and I was able to have some opportunities to communicate with people, interview, provide questionnaires that maybe I would not have. Made connections, obviously, in Nigeria, the Middle East, and also others here in the U.S. And that has been, and I think will prove to be beneficial for me in the years to come. I recently applied for a city manager role. So this project was, in a sense, provided a pathway for me for self-actualization, and I realized a lot of things about myself and what I want to do in my life and professionally. And so just recently applied for a city manager role in Muskegon Heights, which is about 5 minutes from my house. It's a small city of about 10,000 people, and it recently ranked 19th worst city to live in the U.S., which to me is exciting. And so as a result of, working on this project, I could see how this might be the reason that God moved my family, or impressed upon my heart to move my family across the country 1.5 years ago, was maybe to position me to be able to pursue this role. Human systems, how human systems were impacted as a result of this project. I was able to elevate voices of emerging leaders, particularly millennials, and even some that are younger within the context of CCDA. And I'm not quite sure where just yet all of that's going to land. But I submitted a presentation, documentation of all of my interviews and questionnaires with emerging leaders to the CCDA board during a time of major transition. And we'll see where all of that lands. But I offered more than 10 recommendations for what to do based on what emerging leaders were saying within the organization. And then also I improved the online presence of Jerusalem Evangelical Outreach, which is the organization that Rami Felaman in the Middle East and Israel Palestine is the executive director of, and basically designed the equivalent of like a $3,000 website for that organization as part of this project as well. And then God and God's people, what transformational changes happened as a result. So my current role with my church as executive pastor and director of development is that we were able to work on several things, but one of the major things that I brought to this church over the last 1.5 years while I was working on my dissertation as well is I'm leading the church in an organizational development process. And that is something that would not have been done had I not implemented it at this church. And I think we're seeing awesome results, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. And then the church made several decisions at the end of last year, beginning of this year, to begin to loan me out to other organizations in my city as a capacity builder. So my role has actually shifted to basically being a pastor to our city and our county. And my role is more of a missionary role at this point with the church. So I'm in the community a lot more now than I had been in the past. And that is part of what allowed me to be able to apply for the city manager role. And our lead pastor and others that are in the know at the church are knowledgeable about this potential shift in career for me, and behind me 100% on that. And then what I learned as a result of the project, there are 4 intervention archetypes. I've talked about that. I feel like that's something that I, in a sense, have discovered. And I don't know of anyone else that has ever articulated that before in the way that I am right now. When you do a Google search, nothing comes up that is relevant. And so this is an innovation, I believe, and something that I need to continue to explore as well, because I'm sure there's lots of things I haven't learned yet about this concept. And then also, again, my calling is to intervene and transition, and I think that became more clear to me. I remember several years ago on a phone call with Brad in BGU, I remember him speaking to this, and it was kind of the first time I'd ever thought of interventions and intentional transitions as being part of my calling. But that was something that came out of a phone call 2 or 3 years ago with Brad. And part of why I pursued this project, honestly. And so human systems, what did I learn about human systems? Some conclusions that I have come to is, I hate to say it, but globally, middle-aged men have been misusing their power and privilege, and they are a major part of the problem. And all we have to do is look at the 24/7 news cycle, and there's something new to remind us every single day that what I just said is a fact. And communities and organizations should immediately elevate more women and minorities to decision-making roles, is something that I've come to believe as a result of this project. And more middle-aged white men particularly might need to move into new roles within their organizations, take an early retirement, or just resign preemptively to help facilitate the needed shifts in communities and organizations that are required. And at the very least, more men need to use their power and position to help others instead of hurt them. Communities and organizations must begin to also prioritize emerging and future generations by aligning their visions, values, and their money to causes that youth care about. I think this is something that is urgent, and something that in my research that I've come to believe is more important now than ever before. I think the Internet of Things has changed everything, and youth movements are going to continue to rise around the world and gain momentum and basically dictate culture and who makes money in the world, and what organizations and individuals or families who own these various companies, how they're going to make money, and if they are at all. And so youth and what they care about and value is becoming more important than what established generations care about and value. And that's a major shift that's already happening and will continue to happen. And then baby boomers and older Gen Xers, they should not simply just continue to have their way anymore at the expense of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And so that's something I've come to believe and have learned as a result of this project. And then last, about God and God's people. God is the ultimate interventionist. So just thinking about the incarnation of God in Christ and the entire story of the Bible and looking at it through the lens of this project. And then also that life is an unfolding story that we get to co-author with God. And transformational leaders over their lifetime, they bring into the now that which is to come. So they have vision for their lives and for this planet. And a transformational leader is someone that imagines and identifies with the reality that God desires, but they still are living in the reality of what is. So they have a realistic perspective. Transformational leaders, they trade in their ambition for passion. God gives them eyes to see what is missing and new hearts to feel what is broken, and to act to fill in gaps, to put things back together, and to ensure that things are as they ought to be. And that's what I mean by human flourishing as well, and how transformational leaders move systems from chaos to human flourishing. How have I acted as a change agent? I think in 4 different contexts. I think academically, I've been able to include lots of voices that I've met, of people that I've met through BGU, and also others that are connected to people that I've met through BGU. And I think my work could be built upon or continued to be utilized in the context of BGU as well. I tried to, create a project or work on a project that would be relevant for our institution. And then also at home, Aaliyah and I are raising 4 boys, and this project has really helped to shape how I think about myself as a husband and as a dad. And our family essentially as a startup, and that's going to hopefully pay off several years from now. And that's what I try to remind myself when our home is in chaos. And in my church, just a couple things I want to point out. So I've been at this church for 1 year, just over a year. And this church was in major transition before the lead pastor and myself got there. He arrived about 2.5 years before I got there. And we've been able to position this church, 30-year-old church, to rewrite its bylaws in a matter of 1 year, change its leadership structure from a board of directors to elders, agree to have male and female deacons, adopt a membership covenant, increase the annual budget, and finish the year with an excess of just under $100,000 in the general fund. And these are all results or outcomes of just 1 year of me being at this church and being able to provide support to our lead pastor and this organizational development process that I initiated at the church. Lots of other good things already happening for 2019 as well. And then in my city, just being able to work with my church to release me to be able to be a capacity builder in my city, and possibly even to just leave my role altogether. And instead of just getting my feet wet in the 19th worst city to live in the country, just to jump into the deep end. So we'll see where that goes. Okay, we're at the end here. A couple of things. The replicability and of the principles and practices of this project. So I mentioned earlier that in the appendices of this book, or of this project, I added a book proposal. And so what I'm proposing is that I could turn much of this content into a manuscript, and the suggested title of the book would be What's Your Intervention Archetype? How to Transition Human Systems in Chaos. I included a concept called the department or departments of doing good that I think could be located inside of institutions, corporations, and communities to help these all of these entities do good better, and could build on the principles and practices of what I presented in this dissertation project. And then also I could see an academic journal or just an online journal written in a more popular sort of way, where various contexts, communities, established and emerging leaders, where their particular stories are investigated and curated and highlighted in a central place like a journal, whether that's in print or online. Essentially taking the same model that I used to produce case studies for this dissertation project, but then continuing that strategy into a journal. And then also BGU integration. If we thought hard enough, I think we could identify the majority of BGU students all over the world are pursuing interventions and transitions in their context, or they are providing support and working alongside of people who are. And that's what I discovered, particularly with Dr. Dot. Everyone he introduced me to, would be an amazing case study for what I've laid out in this presentation. So that would be just one example. So we've come to the end of my part, and I want to open this for discussion, questions, ideas, concerns, something you want me to articulate a little bit better. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. That's okay.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate the overview. Very good.
Was that 20 minutes or 30 minutes?
Yeah, you're pretty much on the dot, maybe.
Okay, good.
Maybe 25, 30 minutes. Yeah, it was good. Let's do just as Zach said then. Let's go ahead and do some thinking and discussing. You that have been a part of this project, I'd really appreciate you taking the lead and with questions and thoughts and comments. And I'll jump in if I can.
Yeah, I just want to go first. And let me first of all thank Zach for quite an insightful presentation, which is just a reflection of the great work that is done.
Thank you.
When it came around in 2015 and we sort of, sync together, and something that's been on my mind, which is the concept of culture creation, and being able to do that, through prophetic lenses. That's what Zach has been able to put together quite brilliantly, and I'm highly honored to be the one you chose to sort of supervise this work. And you've basically done a good job to the way Brueggemann actually described prophetic imagination, the ability to be able to see and define a new reality. And that's what you've done, in this project. And I must appreciate the very strong creative content in it. The way you've been able to put art into it by giving us new language. This, what's your own, transition archetype. That's a new language. And that's how this thing is so rooted in God, because the first assignment that God gave to man was to name. So your clarity of thought and our ongoing kind of conversation about white evangelicals and all those kind of things. And the way I like to put it, that it's not that white men are declining, it's the emergence of others, which has to be recognized.
That's good.
So so it's not either or, it's both and. And so really thank you very much, Zach, for what you've brought to the table. And I must say, in rounding off, because I'm not going to ask you any kind of questions that would be questioning my own work, but that you have your project didn't end, it's the beginning of something else.
Yes.
And that's what sort of separates your work. It is, you concluding your project actually signaled the beginning of another work. And that's what kind of separates you from just being an academic, or someone who is a real, scholar practitioner. Thank you very much, Zach.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Those are awesome, affirming words. So really great to hear that coming from your supervisor. And
yeah.
I'll chime in just a little bit, Zach. First of all, I'm just really proud of you for when I first became director about this time last year, and I'm kind of surveying the students and saw what you were kind of up against in terms of getting your courses done. And then when you submitted your proposal, it was like, I'm going to figure out how to deal with chaos in every system on the planet. And it was like, okay, well, you still need to graduate. So it was quite Dr. Payne probably remembers, but a little bit of discussion at the academic cabinet meeting about how to help you kind of zero in a little bit to put some teeth to it. And so it actually probably took a lot of humility on your part to kind of receive that. You probably may have initially received it as kind of like a shot to your ego, or to where you were hoping to go with your research, and to see you kind of receive that and then move things forward in a positive direction, in addition to having family responsibilities and multiple jobs and things like that. It was really a pretty remarkable thing to see. So I just wanted to affirm you with that. I think I'm hopeful. I agree with Dalton that this is the beginning of something that you've kind of built up. I think we were encouraging you to build up a mound of research and then kind of move forward from there with either books or journals or other types of things. So I think you accomplished that. I think you managed to be a macro thinker and go really deep with the doctoral dissertation, which was just, again, it was pretty interesting to watch you wrestle through that and do it. But I did want to ask you, if you could picture yourself with these intervention archetypes, like you're working with an individual leader or with an organization or a government, in your mind, how does this play out for you? Like, are you having a consultant hat on and you're working? What does that process look like? Is it a year process, 3-year process, 5-year process? Like how can you take these 4 archetypes, and besides your website, which is great, and your book, which will be a great tool, what does the coaching and consulting process look like for you?
So I think this is a really good question, and I think that it becomes content for coach mentoring relationships that I think this is part of what I envision, where an individual, no matter where they're at in the world or what they're doing, who is interested in having a professional coach work alongside of them, then this would become part of the content I would use, in an online coaching room or regular phone calls, maybe seminars or workshops, that I could do online, in a live setting where people could tune in and could just mentor people right there, kind of in time, on time. So I could see how this content could be integrated with DISC, Berkman, and other assessment instruments. This would just be one tool that I could use with clients, essentially. I think, going into a setting using a vehicle like a Department of Doing Good, that, what does that even look like? I don't know. It's hard to imagine, but I think I'm onto something there. And if I don't do it, move forward with that idea, I'm sure someone else will. I think I pulled it from the ether. So someone's going to implement some similar idea somewhere in the world if they're not already. But I could see these intervention archetypes sort of being integrated into this concept of, putting a Department of Doing Good into an institution or an organization where they become the heart and the conscience of that organization. I just saw, and here's an example. I just read a Fashion Industry Index article where out of 200 points that major fashion companies could score, the highest score in 2018 was 64 points out of 200 possible points. So the fashion industry, just taking that industry as an example, and the 3 fashion companies that scored the highest were Reebok, Patagonia, and there was one other one. I can't think of the other one, but there were 3, right? So those are brands that you've heard of that may even have some of those clothes in your closet, right? So they only scored 64% out of 200 possible points. So imagine putting a Department of Good in there to help them move their points up year after year so that they become more transparent about how their clothes are made, and the impact, the overall impact of that organization. So that'd just be an example, but so these would be some ideas that come to my mind.
And I just have one more quick one because I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to fire away at you. But the prophetic leadership has something. Even since I first met you, I could tell. There's some people that God gifts with just like you can be blunt and you can say this is what it is, and you also have to be able to be kind of able to see where things are going and to be able to provide this intervention and strategy. But also that, it's funny, like at the CCDA conference, there's this big chaotic situation happening and like nobody wants to name it. And you see the leadership there kind of struggling to, like no one can just, they're running leaders up there just to kind of name this general thing that might be happening. And so I thought that was an interesting thing, but also curious about your project. Like if you have a prophetic leadership gift, part of you is like, okay, a researcher has to be kind of like back, just take a back seat and just listen and reflect and then process through things. But also you have to be able to provide really prophetic insight into situations, which is what you have. I think I even had some of that tension of like, okay, Zach, like don't crush them. Like they invited you into their inner circle to their chaos, and like you could just deliver a fierce blow to them, And I actually thought you did a really good job handling that. So it isn't really a question. I just want to hear you just flesh that out a little bit.
So what you're articulating there, I'm a little bit worried about. And one reason why, when I gave that presentation a few minutes ago, and I said, I'm not sure where that's going to land as it relates to just using CCDA as an example and the information that I provided to them. I'm a little bit afraid that I haven't heard anything since I submitted it, and I'm a little bit afraid that they looked at it and, that they didn't have a good feeling about it. I don't know, because, I'm interacting with initially the daughter of the person in question, and so I don't know if she took a look at what I sent, but I tried to, use kid gloves with the whole thing, but also still state the facts, and so I don't know where that's going to land, but I think that I find this to be true even in my own church. I gave a sermon. They have to be careful how many times they let me preach, at the church. I've learned to be a little more, I think I found my voice a little bit better at this stage in life, than maybe even when I started with BGU. But I gave a sermon called Under Obligation. You could track it down on the internet if you wanted to hear it. But I remember after the sermon, there were several people that came and said, those things really needed to be said. Just people giving me that kind of feedback, And I came into staff meeting later that week, just wondering if anyone on the staff was going to say, because I said things like, we track how many people show up to church, but how have we put the equal amount of energy in tracking how many people we've sent out from our church intentionally, and saying things like that from the stage. No one else talks like that from the stage at our church, and probably at most churches, but because of that and what you're identifying there about me is that I've realized that I'm really good at helping things for a while that are in flux. Because sometimes having someone that is like me, different, than what people expect, thinking outside the box, not afraid to say things and actually feel like I have to sometimes, can be good in transition. And then also when something needs to be blown up, I could be the guy that could come in and blow it up, but, just staying somewhere for a long time and maintaining something, I don't think that's how God's designed me, and it just doesn't interest me. And I'm realizing that at this stage in life. So, and I think my dad, who's on this call, probably already knows that about me, and he's wired that way a little bit, I think, too. We're kind of merged. I think I said that in my dissertation.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you.
Hey, Zach, let me ask you a question. And this, you used the term in your dissertation, esoteric. I'm going to just push you to talk about that a little bit. I think you talked about in one area, just, how the demonic actually gets involved in chaos. I think of a place where Paul, there's a point in Paul, and it's in one of the Corinthian letters when he's talking about Satan, and he says we're not unaware of the strategies. Could you talk a little bit about that, just as you thought about that, how being aware of those strategies that are going on at levels that we can't actually see with our eyes, but we experience, how does that fit into your thinking as you're looking at chaos, etc.? Go for that a bit.
Wow, that's a great question. Trying to think of where to start there. I think, so I grew up, so a year after I was born, my parents moved from southern Illinois, where they grew up and most of their family still lives, to Anchorage, Alaska. And then not too long after that, my dad he was discipled by a Southern Baptist pastor, and then he kind of moved into that track of being a Baptist pastor. And so I grew up basically my entire life in a Christian family, Christian parents, and absorbing, Christian theology and thought and practice. And created like a security blanket for me, I think, which now as an adult and over the years, having that sense of security and groundedness, or sort of rootedness in the faith, like, has caused me to want to go to the edges. And that's looked different ways and at different times, but particularly theologically and missiologically, and just sort of being willing to let myself, sort of go into the rabbit hole in a sense, conceptually. And so I'm just not afraid to go there. And when it comes to the esoteric, and when it comes to things that most people don't look into, or, if they were to explore, it could, cause them to lose faith or whatever, like, I'm just not afraid to entertain practically any idea. And so because of that being true about me, it's caused me to be able to look at things, and to research things, and to allow myself to be exposed to different ideas that I think has sort of uniquely prepared me to be able to write a dissertation, project around chaos, without feeling threatened by that, I guess. And so all of that to say, I have worked most of my adult life with people in need. And I realized that just at the basic belief level of people, and then seeing the connection between their beliefs and their behaviors, and trying to walk alongside of people and help people, whether that's in recovery or reentry, or people, living on the street, or people who have sort of walked away from their Christian sort of upbringing, that are, people who are disenfranchised by church, people of other faiths who aren't Christian, but still desire to have a relationship with God, however they define God. Just being able to interact with people and sort of observe their beliefs and their behaviors. I think what I've seen is that that there is a lot more going on than in people and between people, and in systems and between systems, than we even know to articulate, and then most people pay attention to. And so that's caused me to look into conspiracies and all sorts of stuff, and to allow that to shape how I read the Bible. And so I guess, to be more concise, I'm a truth seeker, and I realize that even the stuff that my own dad, who became a pastor, was saved into, and the beliefs and stuff of Baptists and things, there's just more going on than what I've had the opportunity to learn. And so I have to know the truth, and I will go to the edges to find it. And I think that God is up to things that that are, that we don't have theological beliefs about. But I also think that whatever the enemy is, or whoever the enemy is, whether that's ourselves or some devil or Satan or demons, I think that there's all of that stuff is moving chaos forward in people and between people. And I think God is also operating behind the scenes in ways we don't realize or can even articulate, to work in people and between people to resolve that. Otherwise, I just don't see how heaven is possible unless God gives everyone a mind swipe, like sort of deletes all of our memory and gives us a new, like starts us with a clean slate. It's kind of like where I'm at theologically. And so, like, somehow all this chaos between people and in people has to be resolved here and now. And then whatever's unfinished, God will resolve in what we oftentimes call like the final judgment or whatever. But all of this stuff has to be resolved. So in my mind, when I read Jesus had a ministry of reconciliation and that ministry has been given to us, like that's the most important thing in the Bible about what it means to be a Christian. Because we're essentially doing the work of heaven. And anything that is in opposition to reconciling people to themselves, to God, and to one another, and to the place that they're meant to live, like their natural habitat, this planet, anything that's in opposition to that is evil. And if there are demonic forces behind it, then I'm not afraid of that, and I don't think Christians should be. But anything that helps move that forward, whether it has a Christian bumper sticker on it or not, then I think that's of God also, because that's how heaven's going to be possible in my current sort of theological frame of reference. So to me, I tried to do something in this dissertation project that I think is the most important thing I could write about, which is the work of heaven here and now. And doing interventions, whether that's between two people or two organizations or two cultures or two societies or two nations or whatever, doing interventions and helping move people from where they are to where God wants them to be, like that is the most important work of a Christian. And I think every church should be doing that, and anything that doesn't help accomplish that, then why are we doing that? It has to be a question. And then any Christian in their professional work needs to somehow tie into that. And if it doesn't, then why are we in that career? Needs to be a question. So those are just some of my stream of consciousness thoughts, that come to my mind.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my background is in counseling, and because I did my doctorates in that, I did a lot of work with people. I know all the psychological disciplines because I had to go through them all. I had to know them all, use them all. But then in my actual counseling practice, I really began to see how the demonic works.
Yes.
And did a lot of thinking, reading, talking, practitioners in the area. And I guess I really would encourage you to be doing some thinking more in that area, just the strategies. You go through the Bible and just begin to understand the strategies that are used by the enemy. There's a book, I forget what it's called, something like The Tactics of War, that really just kind of goes over some of the tactics that are used. When we're in war, we need to know the tactics of the enemy. And we need to be aware of those tactics if we're going to counteract those tactics. And so I would encourage you, Ephesians 6, of course, you quoted that in your dissertation, but I would, that's a beginning point. I would really encourage you to begin to see how that whole unseen world, and learning those strategies and understanding what's going on, how that kind of an awareness really will increase yours and my effectiveness as a transformational leader who is aware of what's going on in the enemy camp.
Yeah, that's well said. I had when I lived in the Houston area, I tried to reach out to see if I could, this isn't something I've done here in Michigan, but if I could identify, like if there were any Catholic priests in my area who had experience with exorcisms.
Right.
Because I, like in my own faith, when I was connected to Southern Baptists, like that's like, who can I identify that has experience with that? I don't know. But like, I know like within the Catholic tradition, there's more of an awareness, and there's actually like, priests who dedicate their entire lives, ministries to this type of work. And so it's something that's kind of been in me for probably 2 to 3 years now, is to identify someone who would be, legitimately considered an exorcist, to begin to sort of learn from them, not so much like how to perform an exorcism, but sort of the philosophical, theological, like everything that comes along with having those kind of experiences that most people would never even dream of,
Mm-hmm.
So that's, if you know someone that you could refer me to, or either of the other guys, I'm wanting to identify someone that I could study under in an informal sense, where I could sort of begin to absorb some of what they have learned.
early on in the school's history, when I was working with when we first started the school before it was even BGU, we had Neil Anderson, who has done a lot of work. He's very well respected in the academic community. He's written, Walking Through Darkness. I'm just looking at my bookshelf, Spiritual Warfare, The Bondage Breaker. Anyway, Neil, he's got a good academic background, but he's also a practitioner. That's just one name, but when you think about the fact that, if you think, I'll just give you an example. A tactic of Satan beginning in the garden, right, planted doubt in the mind of Adam, Eve, okay? He was a doubt planter, which then began to create mistrust, suspicion, not really believing, that's just one example of how a thought can get planted in a person's mind, and then it can grow, right? That can lead into a chaos kind of situation so easily. But, it's understanding those tactics that enemy forces use. I personally believe that we need to understand those kinds of dynamics just as much as, we can look at DISC tests, and I had to use the DISC test, and a lot of those things. And those are good. Okay, I'm not putting down any of that. But at least, and I'm just kind of speaking my own mind, okay?
Sure.
We need to, as transformational Christian leaders, we need to become very, very aware of the whole spiritual dynamic that is unseen. And we just got to make sure that we never lose sight of what is happening behind the scenes, and bringing those into our conversation and in our writing and into our strategic thinking.
Yeah.
Just
well said.
My thought.
I agree.
If you notice that, it is Dot. If you notice that, that was one aspect of your dissertation that I had the least kind of comments, because I believe your dissertation is not big enough for us to be able to begin a discussion on the reality of the unseen. As an African, we're not new to the power of demonic forces. In fact, we believed in the devil before we believed in God. And we had to learn that, because demonic forces are typified by darkness, and God is typified by light. That's where the battle ended. So for many years, when the evangelicals and the Pentecostals got here, the most common ministry was the ministry of deliverance. And those things were kind of so real. So for us in Africa, the power of evil, is not new. And where the West is getting to now, where the whole thing is now being put on the internet, where people get initiated into witchcraft and all those kind of things, we've always known that. And now we can see how that has affected both economic, social, political development, in this kind of, in this climate. So that's not new to us. When we talk about chaos, the force of evil is given. So it's how, for us to now begin to walk in victory over them is what we research. So the West need to know it. So, so we need to come to terms with that when things like Harry Potter came out, those kind of things, it won't really sort of, be a sort of attraction to an African, because we've seen all these kind of things in real time. We've seen child, witchcraft. We've seen, these things are real, in our kind of context. So we cannot afford to continue to disregard it. That time has demonic forces. Money has demonic forces. And, there's a school now in South Africa where they study witchcraft. People get doctorate degrees in it. So, in our own kind of definition of civilization, especially in your own context where you want to be talking about chaos and how you want to intervene and transition, you cannot underestimate the power of evil. He said that we cannot underestimate the devices or the strategies of the evil one.
Hmm.
Because the greatest strategy of hell, of the devil, is to make you believe it doesn't exist so that they can wreak havoc.
Hmm.
So these are the things. He sort of mask himself. Bible says he transformed himself to an angel of light.
Hmm.
So we have to understand that when the Holy Spirit left Saul and the spirit for the evil one came upon him, he equally prophesied.
Hmm.
So manifestation. Now, where I'm going is that manifestations are not the yardstick. Why you want to go seek a Catholic priest who is into exorcism and all those kind of things. Manifestation is not the yardstick to measure evil. Evil has become so intelligent. Today's devil wears suits. He wears designer suits. And it's not, the picture of the devil is no longer, one with a pigtail or with a pitchfork and a tail. No, he speaks good English. He comes in terms of fashion. He designed political systems. He's the force behind wealth and poverty at the same time. So that's why I have come to a point where I believe that in the world we live in today, good and evil, they are in a tie.
That's right.
So transformational leadership rises above that. It's bigger than good. To say God is good is an insult. God is godly.
Amen.
Godly is higher than evil. So because something happened in the war in Syria, right? The president of Syria, Assad, sent a bomb into a hospital. And a classmate of his, I hope you know that he's a medical doctor. A classmate of his was the one actually that is in charge of the rehabilitation work in that hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we have also seen here in my own kind of context where the greatest donors to IDP camps are also people who does gun running. So that's where evil is. And in transitioning systems that we alleviate or eradicate chaos, we must understand the current manifestation of evil. It's no longer in sort of physical, somebody vomiting or somebody giving out a loud shout and all those kind of things. It's become very, very intelligent.
Yeah,
and right. It's not too far from all of us. I just wanted to chip that in.
Yeah.
You've just mentioned one other strategy of the enemy, Dylan, is that he presents himself as an angel of light, right? Which is what Paul says.
Absolutely.
I think that's another, it's learning those strategies. There's another place I guess read for you. It's in James 2 or 3, he contrasts wisdom from above and wisdom from below. Demonic versus divine, and the demonic has confusion, chaos, arrogance, where the wisdom from above is self-seeking, where wisdom from above is peaceable. It's open to reason. It's yielding. It's kind of amazing, just as you can say in James 2 or 3. It's kind of interesting. I used to do sermons on that particular passage, and just as we are looking at what we're thinking is wisdom, where it's coming from. Again, another strategy. Just learning some of those strategies. I'll say it again, and you've said it. You just mentioned, angel of light. Don't just look for Satan in the esoteric kinds of things where you look at the Catholic priest exercising. Look at all of life is this warfare, and
discernment,
becoming aware and discerning what's going on every moment around us, in us and through us, and in the people around us. Yeah,
that's good. I jotted some notes down there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I remember your little book.
What's that?
I said, I remember your little book. You have that little book where you write a lot of
my moleskin journal.
All right. Well, others, anything else we want to kind of bring onto the table here? Jim, anything you want to add to the discussion here? You haven't said much, but I don't want to force you, but if you got anything to share, jump on it.
Yeah, I was going to call him too to hear him.
I just appreciate with Mom and I, Lisa and I, just appreciate being involved
All right.
in this process. We've watched, Zach was born out of Anna kind of a situation where we couldn't have kids. And I remember 10 of 11 kids from a pretty dysfunctional background and family. So we knew God was doing something really special and with him, a prophetic promise, and didn't tell him. He found out for himself. It was difficult to keep that secret for years and years, but all this conversation is kind of cycled through our family with Zach, and we're not surprised that at all. I'm not surprised at all that he is where he is today in his thought processes, his belief systems, and how the Lord's going to use him in the future in the area of marketplace and ministry place, and integrating those two, which is, we all know is desperately needed today. There's too much separation between the two in the average Christian's life. So we're happy to be here and just kind of sit through this and watch the interaction. We appreciate you guys so much of pouring into his life, and he looks to all of you desperately as mentors and people that he really admires and trusts. So we appreciate what you poured into him these years. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
I appreciate just knowing his heritage and his lineage, Jim, just seeing you. And all right. What did you say the name Zachary means? God remembers? Was that right, Zach?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's that mean to you?
I don't know. So I think that I think that God remembers why my parents were able to have kids all of a sudden, and I don't remember that. I feel like I have to learn that, I have to come to understand that as God sort of rolls that out in my life, and I feel like, so I joined the military when I got out of high school, and ever since then, I feel like I'm just kind of stumbling my way forward, trying to figure out what God is supposed to be remembering, So, and then doing that in the best way that I can, whether that's, working and doing the best job that I can for the church that, that I'm working with, or, the businesses that my dad and I operate, or other opportunities that come along, I think being faithful, in the things that I can do, and that I know that responsibilities and roles that I do have, but I still feel like there's something that I don't know yet, that I haven't discovered or uncovered yet. And there's some opportunity that I came into existence for that I don't know what that is yet, and I think God will just reveal that at some later point. Once Aaliyah and I started having kids, part of me thinks, that part of what I feel, whatever that is, that I feel that I can't really put words to, is just being a dad, and that, and sort of replicating what my parents did for me, with my kids, and that my story and legacy go on in my boys, and so I think in a very sort of real sense, in a soulful sense, my purpose in life is to invest in my boys, and they'll go on to do things that I haven't even imagined, And so, I think I get a sense of that from my own dad, I see how a lot of the decisions that he's made since I've been an adult, and probably before, but since I've been able to notice, I guess, he makes those decisions with me and my siblings in mind, they're thinking from a long game perspective and legacy versus just what's best for him and my mom, and so I see that modeled. I want to model that with my boys, with me and Aaliyah, but I still think professionally there's some impact I'm going to have in some kind of a role, and I don't know what that is. I was born on President's Day in 1984, so this is part of me joined the military thinking, well, if I'm ever going to be president, I probably should have some military service under my belt. some people like that and appreciate that, when it comes to voting.
Yep.
You stand a great chance in Nigeria.
Yeah. All right. Good. All right.
Can I just say something, Bill, before we continue?
Yeah, go for it.
What Brian said about that prophetic, kind of, if I want to summarize, maybe that prophetic kind of impatience or that saying it the way it is. I believe that there is a growing process, and I always use two biblical prophets to sort of, explain that. There's a prophet called Micaiah who would prophesy to Ahab, and he had a reputation that he never prophesied what Ahab wants to hear. He comes and he's always maybe taken into jail, or something like that. He had a terrible reputation.
Right.
But there is the guy who prophesied to David, that's Nathan, who walked into the palace and had a reputation of respect. And he was going to give the king a very terrible news. And he started with a story. So he never told the king what the king did wrong. He put the king in a position where the king was able to tell himself,
right.
that he was the one who indicted himself. So that's a process where the prophet grows from a Micaiah kind of model to the Nathan kind of model, where you are able to speak a word in due season, where you're able to communicate something that might be terribly negative in a very, with so much wisdom. That because there are prophets who are friends of the king and they bring chaos. But there are also prophets who are also friends of the king, but in a very, maybe in a kind of an influential kind of position where the king looks to them. The situation that brings shalom is when the king looks to the prophet. When the king, believes, when the king calls the prophet father, like Joash calling Elisha, my father, my father. So that's the kind of, so prophets are not always like the John the Baptist that's tearing everything down, that's sort of causing a lot of, adding to the chaos that they're supposed to sort of transition into shalom. But they are able to, kind of speak with wisdom. They can stoke the fire with a parable.
That's right.
And so that's really, so it's a journey. That's why today it's a very, common thing that we need to be lifelong learners.
Yeah.
So in this prophetic journey, there is a lot of growth, that can actually come into it. I was like that, and I think I'm still learning. I've always kind of, the prophet must speak truth to power, and you don't care whose ox is God. So, but now there is that sense of a bit of some patience that's coming into it, a bit of wisdom that's coming into it. So there's a lot of growing up to do. But please don't let truth intimidate you. If God has put it in your mouth to speak it, please speak it. We must rather obey God rather than man. Thank you.
Amen. Yeah.
Good. It's well said. It makes me think, when Jesus got up in his hometown and he read from the scroll of Isaiah, and everyone knew what he was doing after a few moments, and he's using examples of their sworn enemies, like God blessing them and working through them. It makes me think, like, if he could give that sermon again, at the end of his ministry versus at the beginning, would he have done it the same way? Like, did he really want them to run him out of the synagogue and try to push him off a cliff and drop rocks on him? Is that what he was going for? Or was he just trying to find his voice, as a prophet, So.
Amen. Another proverb that struck me when you were just talking about the Proverbs 15, verses 1-2, I think it is. In the NAS version especially, it says, wisdom makes knowledge acceptable. And as I thought about Nathan coming to David, that's exactly what it took. God gave him wisdom to impart the knowledge that needed to be imparted to David. And that happened to be through a story. Of course,
That's
our own
good.
Lord used stories, parables all the time to impart truth. And like you say, that helps people hear, and then they arrive at the truth themselves. Usually when we tell people the truth, they have deaf ears. But when we put it in a story narrative form, they tend to come to truth on their own. And again, just another communication device, of course, as we're working in chaos and trying to diffuse situations.
Maybe using more narrative approach if I am going to write a manuscript or something, taking a more of a
I think
narrative
so.
approach might be one direction to go.
That's part of my thinking, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we kind of live in a narrative generation right now. All right. Well, we're going to close out here. Hey, Aliyah, anything you want to say about living with this man and what this journey has been a little bit like for you?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just really thankful for this entire process. Zach it's been really fun to watch him growing and thinking outside the box, and even in how he applies it at home and with our family. And it's just, for the last several years, it's just been a really exciting process. So I'm just really proud of him and excited about it.
Wow.
That's about it.
All right. Great. All right. Those are
Great.
good words.
Thanks, Aliyah. Thank you. Great words.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move into this evaluation session that we have to do. Anybody else want to say anything before we do that? I don't want to cut anybody off. All right. What I've got to do, I've got to put
I think
a few
Lisa might
on hold for a moment. Your screen will say something like you're on hold. Don't go away.
Yeah, I think, Bill, I think Zach's mom would like to say something.
Hey, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Oops.
I remembered.
We can't hear you.
There we go.
Didn't remember the story. I met a lady named Eloise, and I was not walking with God at the time, and she intervened in my life and prayed for me that day that I would return to Christ. And she asked me what my heart's desire was, and I said, we desire a child. And we had been praying for a child for many years. And so that day I returned to Christ. We prayed for my husband's salvation, and we prayed for a child, and she asked God to give us a child within 1 year. And God answered that prayer.
Wow.
And my husband was saved 8 months later, and we found out we were expecting Zach 9 months later. So God remembered our prayer and wanted Zach to be born in a Christian family. And that was part of God's plan for him. So God is still showing us the plan and unfolding it. And it's been a special day today to see.
Yeah, thank you, Mom. My parents have taken care of hundreds of kids over the years as foster parents and in children's homes, and I also have one biological sister as well, so they were able to have 2 kids.
Wow. That's so good. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's always so good just to, like I say, see Mom and Dad and who are behind this man that brought this one into the world. All right, so good. All right, well, I think that's a good note for us to kind of move into our evaluation. So again, your screen will say you're on hold. All right, there should be 3 of us left in the room. I think that's the case.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop the tape recorder for a moment. All right, we're all back together again. Well, Dr. Hamilton, congratulations.
Thank you.
You passed with flying colors. we greatly appreciate the work you've done.
Yeah.
We think that you have put together a process that has great I can't even say the word, but implications for transformational leaders. As we, as you've designed the archetype assessment and kind of a how-to guide how to use that assessment as one more tool for transformational leaders to begin to understand themselves. I think one of the things that we did say in our evaluation is that you are a big thinker, and you know that, and you also know that you need to have people that you're on a team with who are the implementers, who will always keep you taking the big thoughts and implementing them at various levels. And as I see your archetype test, it's doing that very same thing. It's letting each of us look at ourselves, and then as a team, let's say a transformational team, we understand each other's perspectives, and then we learn how those perspectives fit together in order to accomplish the tasks that the Lord has called us to do in our different contexts.
It's good.
Go ahead, guys. Others can say their word. Those were my 2 cents.
Yeah, congratulations, Zach. Dr. Zach Hamilton. And
Thank you.
It's such a delight to be able to say that. And let me amplify what Bill said about the need for you to raise a team. I came in contact with something that looked like what you're doing with this guy, Alan Hirsch. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes.
He came up with this APEST kind of, something like, like an assessment tool for using the fivefold ministries. We have done that in our ministry, and I discovered too that I'm a big picture kind of guy. I can struggle with being patient. And I did it with a group of students some years ago where I said, okay, apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, and teacher, can you guys design businesses that expresses these offices? And it was such an amazing exercise. The apostles came up with a school, an elementary school. The pastor started a hospital. The evangelist started a media house. The prophets began a stockbroking firm. And the teacher started a consultancy firm. So by the time they finished this whole exercise, I said, okay, how do you guys work together? So they said, well, for the hospital, the schools will develop the doctors for us. They will produce the doctors for us. And then when we set up this school, we're going to have funds. How do we invest it? The stockbrokers will come. And then the teachers and then the consultancy firm will sort of train the people that we have on the job. And we need to promote our products. The media house will do that. So you see how there is that place of individualism and also the value they place on being able to integrate, be able to work together. None of those companies could work alone. And that's really where I believe you need to come to appreciate. While you understand yourself as the big picture guy, the macro guy, you need to place the same value, if not higher, on those who are micro, those who are leaders, those who can see, you see the big picture, they see the small picture. They kind of apply the brakes for you because what you've done has to be done. What you've written has to be done. Because like Bill said, you've added you've written something that has great implications for both BGU and even your own society, going forward. It can't remain on the bookshelf. It must be done. And it can only be done by a team. Bad news is that you can't do it alone. That's the bad news. And let me also congratulate Jim and your mom for what your eyes are seeing. The pastor in me is speaking in, and many more great things you will see, in the life of your son. And because he is the one who God used to remind you that he remembers. And there are many things that's going to bring to your remembrance. And I want to thank you for the legacy that we see today. The Dr. Zach that we talk about today, God has used you I remember walking into his room while we were in Abuja, and he was talking to you on FaceTime. So I know how close the two of you are, and you run the business together. Let me thank you for the story that you've allowed God right through you. And it's just the beginning. I met his 3 sons, and what I see there is awesome potential. I actually saw the 4th one, but it was in the womb when I was there. So, I mean, this is a great story, and I'm so glad to be part of it.
For sure.
And God will make you see many more good things when maybe one day when the 4 boys too are maybe in an oral session for a doctorate degree, you will still be there. Maybe talk slowly, but you will still be there. That's my prayer for you. Thank you so much for the great thing you've done. And
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And thank you, Aliyah, for being such a great support. My interaction with you shows that you've identified your ministry so much. And I pray God will continue to strengthen you and really make you discerning to be able to function in that ministry to its very fullest. You are born to raise champions, and I pray you succeed in that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Those are, I don't know how to follow up those words, but it was really powerful. But Dr. Zach, just congratulations to you. I'm thrilled for you. I meant what I said earlier. I work with enough, now that I'm kind of involved with the whole DTL program, I work with a lot of students who end up on the amount of people that couldn't finish their dissertation because life got too busy or they just had too much. It became too overwhelming. And so that's why I really appreciate what you did. You could have used any number of excuses. Even you and me sitting at the CCDA conference while you have a little one who's about to be born, and you're trying to really focus in on getting your research done. And so I'm just really inspired by you. Want to encourage you, as the others have said, just to not be a lone ranger, but to bring others along with you for the journey. I know you can get stuck in your own head a lot, and so just be really intentional about bringing others along. I will encourage you not to let this go too far after you graduate. I was told when I graduated from BGU that there's about a 5-year window where your research is fresh and relevant, and you want to try to really out there. So that just want to encourage you. You're probably going to take some time off, I'm sure, with your family just to breathe it out and to but don't take too long to come back to it, because it is really important research and really needs to move forward. And I was thinking about the prophet Nathan that was mentioned earlier, that Dot mentioned earlier, and how he was able to do that. I think I don't know if this applies necessarily, but you and I had a chance to have lunch with Ray Bakke when we were at the CCDA conference, and since I just graded your paper on your time with Ray in the Middle East, he kind of reminds me of, like, he's like the nicest person in the world, but some of the prophetic things that he says, he has you thinking about them long afterward, and it can be delivered in kind of a loving way. And I could see you wrestling through that Middle East paper. Encouragement to you is just to think, you're right now, you're in the stage with all these responsibilities, but the rest of your stage of your life kind of moving into this stage where you're working with leaders, and so just be that kind of leader, where you're telling stories and you're catching other people up in the adventure, because you have a lot to offer. And I know firsthand, being a dreamer, it's hard to stay rooted in one place for a long time, and you have a lot of moves in your history and things like that. But just want to encourage you to, that's a little bit why I was asking some of those questions earlier, is just to encourage you to stay with people for as long as you can, because your temptation is going to be to kind of move on from their lives or from their situations. And but the work that you're doing requires, more of a long-term approach, I think. And just wanted to, again, also affirm with Jim and Lisa, great job with this young man. I'm just really impressed by him. And Ali, I know I graduated in 2012 from BGU and only had 2 young children at the time. And my wife, it was quite a financial sacrifice and a time sacrifice for her to help to be supportive for me to finish up my degree. And just wanted to affirm you in the sacrifices that you've made for Zach to get to this point. This is kind of both getting up to this point. It's a big deal. It really is. So, yeah, I'm just excited for you. And that's my encouragement, is just keep going. This is just the beginning for you, Zach. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Amen. Any other words? Anybody else would like to speak? All right.
Congratulations, Zach. Mom and I are really proud of you, and congratulations. This is probably some of the most meaningful work that I can think of in the world. I'm glad it has you on assignment in this way.
Thank
Congratulations, Dr. Hamilton.
Wow.
We won't know who people are talking to from now on when they say Dr. Hamilton, huh?
All right. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, all we have to kind of close this session down. We've kind of gone at it for about 2 hours. It's been good.
Yeah.
That we've learned some things. I always learn something every time I get together with people. The Lord seems to reveal new things to us, and I've always appreciate the Lord's work in that way. And I hope you have all learned some new insights also as we've wrestled together.
Mm-hmm.
So could somebody maybe close us? I don't know. Jim, would you close us in prayer?
Great.
Sure.
There you go.
Father, thank you for just the time able to share in your presence.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, God, for just blessing our lives in so many different ways and using us in your kingdom to serve you. God, thank you that you've moved from faith to faithfulness to fruitfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And Lord, thank you that you hold us in your hand. You provide everything that we need to serve you. And thank you that we've rallied around these moments with Zach and these men together, and not only in your presence, God, but for something that we believe is meaningful, that has the capacity to help change the world and make it more the place that you desire it to be. Lord, we do know that nothing is about flesh and blood. Everything is about powers and principalities.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that God, in the near future, that there will be powers and principalities that will come against this movement.
Mm-hmm.
And we pray, God, for your strength and your courage for Zach. Thank you for these men and BGU and all that you do through them. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
All right.
Congratulations.
All right.
Thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you.
All right. Thank you. Good. All right, guys. I will send this little form to you, Brian, to you, Dot, and we'll get that filled out, and then we'll send it off to Judy. I'll send you an email just to kind of tell you what to do with that form. Okay, and then we'll be good. All right, all.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting you, Jim. And Alea, good to hear your voice again. And Dr. Zach.
Appreciate you, Dot. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Yeah.
Amen.
All right, Brian.
See you, everybody.
Going down.
All right.
Bye, everyone.